Hey guys, I want to break down a circuit for you. Some guys have a hard time seeing a motor ladder logic, ladder circuit, and control, however, and they have a hard time breaking it down into what the PLC wants to see on this SoMachine Basic programming for the Schneider M221 controller. So the example I'm going to use for simplicity is we're going to do the forward reverse circuit. So right now I'm just going to kind of draw in how this circuit would be in the real world, a basic forward reverse interlock circuit, and what we would do to break that down so that the PLC is happy. So I'm going to put my abbreviations off to the side so I can save some room for other items. Come off this same rung. I'll do the same thing here. Forgive my messiness. I'm just trying to get you to break down the circuit. After I get this drawn, we're going to methodically break it down piece by piece, input by input. So right now there's your basic drawing as far as how that should look in the circuit. So here's your motor logic, and then the students are like, well, what the heck do I do with this? So first thing you got to do really is say to yourself, how many inputs do I have? So we know switches and sensing devices are inputs. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4 inputs, because as you're aware, this is your overload. And we want to pick that up in our lab and simulate that the overload works and that it's in the right place. So in the PLC world, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to label this. On your drawing, you'll get this sheet, and you're just going to call this input 0, and you'll call this, I guess, input 1. Why don't we call this input 2, which is really your third input, right? Remember how these go. And then input 3, which is really your fourth input. So if there's inputs in the circuit, there must also be outputs in the circuit. How many outputs do I have? I have a coil and a coil. So this is my forward reverse contactor. There's actually 2 coils. We're going to simulate this with an actual relay coil. So we're going to call this Q0.0. We're going to call this Q0.1. So now we've got our inputs and outputs all squared away. Now we need to call them what they are. You know, whatever relay is in the field, and if it's got contacts, we know that those contacts are controlled by that relay. So let's finish marking the interlock. So we know that this is an R, and we know that this was an F contact. So where are the F contacts? We have to make them now Q0.0 so the PLC is happy. So look for your F contacts. There's one over here. So we can call this one Q0.0. There's another F contact over here. We're going to call that Q0.0. We got to do the same with the R. R has a different address. It's got Q0.1. So find the old R contacts and make them Q0.1s. Q0.1. That's kind of the easy way of trying to break this down so that you know how you're going to lay it out on a sheet or in your program if you choose to go right to the program. So let's pretend we're going to a sheet and we're going to lay this out how the computer wants to see it. So what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to start off with this first line. I'm going to make this line as you see it, that first rung. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to make it open. I know stops are normally closed. I'll go over that in a minute. I'm going to make this start, or forward rather. Looks like a start circuit. Then I'm going to come over here. I'm going to add this interlock, normally closed. So that is that. Now the PLC needs to see the input on this side of the coil. Schneider SoMachine Basic puts the coil right at the end of the rung. and it won't allow you to put a contact after, so we'll just put it before. Circuit works the same. You're going to notice I'm going to make my overload, I'm going to make it normally open. I'll explain why. And then we make our symbol for the coil. So that first rung is going to have the same addresses that we put up here before, because we have to enter them as an address on the PLC directly above the contact or the coil. Now, I'm going to put these in here and then I'll explain why I made a couple of these contacts. Excuse me. Q0.1, a couple of these contacts open. This is going to be my input, and I'll make this Q0.0. Now you notice I'm going to do the same down here. Once again, that's that, that's that. Now I made my stop normally open, and I made my overload normally open, because in our lab we want to simulate them with a single pulse switch. Now pretend that the switch is in the on position, the circuit would be closed. So the PLC, when you have your stuff all wired in, this will actually be shaded in green. Same thing with a stop button. That's going to be shaded in green, which means it's true and there's a path for current flow. I like that personally than making the contact normally closed, because this shows the physical functionality of the button. So I know that once that cover is on, I know that my stop is intact and I have a path for current flow here. Same thing with my single pole switch that I'm going to use to simulate my overload. I'm making that a normally open contact. When the switch is in the on position, this will be shaded, letting me know that my overload is intact. If I want to trip the overload, I'm simply going to turn the switch off or open the circuit. Makes more sense for students too. So we don't have a name for this. I'm going to show you what that name's going to be in a minute. Next thing we're going to do, we know this is rung 0. Now we're going to make this part of the circuit from the stop through the reverse into that coil. So we've got 2 steps we got to do. And it's really, we're going to duplicate this line very similarly to what we had in the first line. The only thing that's going to change are the names. So let's start off with this coil. That's Q0.1. This is going to be Q0.1. We'll get back to this in a second. Let me unshade that. This is Q0.0. So remember, that's that interlock. Q0.0. We come back over here. This is input 2. This contact is controlled by coil. This is Q0.1. And then last but not least, the stop is still input 0, input 0.0. And this would be rung number 1. Now, we have these 2 open contacts that don't have a name. I know that these are my overloads. All right, I know they are. What I have to do is find a way to simulate that overload. I'm going to make another rung over here. I'm going to make an open contact. And this is where we're going to use a memory bit. Now, if you remember from one of my other lessons, a memory bit is basically an imaginary relay that actually functions in the circuit but doesn't give you a physical output in the field. My first memory bit is M0. I have lots of memory bits and I could use them, and I've got a lot of contacts that I can associate to that memory bit. That's the great part about this, how it acts differently than a normal relay. This is now going to be an input. I have to activate this as my overload. So I'm going to use this as my overload. Remember, there's no physical output, but it will make a reaction in the circuit. But I do need an input to drive that. So let's look at the last input we had up here. We were calling that overload as input 3, because I'm going to use that as input 3. And I'm going to erase this for now so you can see where my thinking was. So we'll leave that the way it is. I'm going to come back over here. Input 3, I'm going to use a single pulse switch. I'm going to leave it in the on position. And what'll happen, I'm sorry, yeah, input 3 is going to initiate a memory bit. So anything that's tied into that MO becomes that. So that's this. There's my MO. There's my MO. This is acting like a relay. So these contacts will then change position. Now, like I said, if I make this normally open in my lab, my switch will actually be in the on position. It's going to be in the on position. What's going to happen is that path for current flow will exist, and it's going to energize this MO, and it's going to close this. So I'll see that on my program. I'll see this path for current flow. So we want our overloads to be intact in the circuit. We want them to be shaded in green. I prefer that because then it allows the rest of my circuit to work as it should when I press forward or reverse. So that's kind of the best way of breaking this down. This is what you're used to in motor controls. And once again, if I wanted to come up here, I could call this input 3 again, but I know that MO I'm using as a memory bit to drive that overload. So you always got to think about that. And yeah, I mean, this is an easy circuit. When they get more complicated, you're going to want to break them down in your brain this way. Then I would then take this and enter this right into the laptop, right into the Schneider Sew Machine Basic program, simulate it, and you'll see that it works. So hopefully you enjoyed that and you got something out of that, and I'll see you at the next video.